All right, welcome to week 5 of the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship Study Group. Thanks for joining us. Today's presentation will be by Dom here on the Ethereum roadmap and some of the research avenues that are taking place currently. Mario, are we able to hear you right now?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone, can you hear me?
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so
Yes,
much.
gotcha.
My camera is off again. Yeah, thank you for intro, Josh. I think you said all right. We are having Domothy today, talking about the research and roadmap about the future of the protocol. In the last 3-4 weeks, we've covered the intro and the weeds of different domains of the protocol and how it all comes together into the one thing. But it's just the current instance, the current version of the protocol. So the future brings many new improvements and features and lots of interesting research we need to figure out before we get there. So I'm very thankful to have Domothy here today to tell us all about that. So yeah, the stage is yours.
All right, thanks for having me. All right, so you see the first slide. All right, perfect. So, hi everyone. My legal birth name is Domothy, and I like to describe myself as the mouthpiece of the Ethereum Foundation Research (R&D). So, today I'm gonna walk you through the whole roadmap. So, the whole diagram that you see from Vitalik that he updates on a yearly basis, which is at first glance it's kind of a mess. So I'm gonna hopefully make some sense of it, having going through all the different urges. So hat tip to Vitalik for basically outlining this whole presentation for me for free, because I'm just gonna go down the list and from left to right and top to bottom. Um, so yeah, at first glance it's kind of a mess from the outside perspective. So I really want to get, like, if I do my job right, you're gonna take away from this presentation that it's actually a very beautiful roadmap with all the pieces merging together to form a beautiful blockchain. Um, so yeah, I had a little TLDR for all of the urges, so I'm gonna go one by one. And it started with the merge that we all know was the single most important event in Ethereum history. which the TLDR is better proof of stake, and we'll see that I got all these slides. So the beacon chain launch, going from the beacon chain to the merge, I'm just stealing diagrams here with the execution layer and the beacon chain. Like before the merge, we had this like quote unquote an empty beacon chain where all the responsibility was just validators voting. I'm sorry, my cat's gonna be annoying throughout this whole presentation. I apologize in advance. Yeah, so the beacon chain has almost 1 million active validators, so that's a lot of economic security that was enhanced with the merge compared to. I'm seeing comments in the chat. Compared to proof of work before, where like there was no penalty as such. It was just you waste hash rate and you're not gonna get rewarded. Whereas now you both get rewarded and you get penalties if you're like malicious or do anything that's not specified in the beacon chain spec. And yeah, that's $110 billion of economic security. Afterwards, I'm just gonna go brush the sync committee, the like protocol very, very quickly. It's basically having 1 million valid signatures to verify every epoch, and like I think it's 512th of that every single slot. It's very heavy for like client that don't want to verify everything. So instead, we have this rotation of 512 validators that they have like extra weight for what is the head of the chain, and that's what like client basically trust in a like it's not a trustless fashion as much as verifying every single signatures, but it is a pretty good protocol if you want to have a very light client and know what block is inside the canonical chain. So you can see this link that I added in the notes on the GitHub about A16Z's Helios client, because they introduced the light client protocol very succinctly, and they actually built a client that uses that. And yeah, the same, just keep that in the back of your mind, because the sync committee and the light client protocol is gonna come back a little bit later. Another item in the future is secret leader election, that it's gonna enhance the basically the leader is the validator that is in charge of proposing a block at that very slot. And right now it's kind of a known flaw in the beacon chain that this leader is known ahead of time. Like you can in theory, there's an attack vector where like a large pool or malicious validator could correlate IPs with specific validators and then launch a denial service attack on that specific validator, so they wouldn't be able to propose a block, and then all the MEV would flow into the next block. And right now we haven't seen this sort of attack or anything near that so far, so like knock on wood, it's not gonna happen. But if it does happen, we're gonna have this item is gonna start being way more priority. And we know the protocol called Whisk, which basically is every validator adds a random had their own bit of randomness to this list of potential validators. And the like grossly oversimplified is that nobody knows who the next leader is except that leader himself, and they reveal themselves as they reveal a block. So it wouldn't be possible to attack them ahead of time because you wouldn't know who you have to attack. Boxes in green, no, there's the little line in the middle, so that's like the present, that like everything on the left of the line is what's done, and everything on the right is it's the progress bars basically. So secret leader election is like halfway done because we know how to do it, but like there's no urge to implement it, and it's not a high priority. And then like I said, unless we start seeing actual serious attacks, then like we know what to implement. Afterwards, I'm not sure in week 3 on the consensus layer how much was talked about finality, but basically it's this new concept added to the chain after the merge, where after 12.6 minutes or 2 epochs, you have this block that's called finalized. Why is it green, blue, pink? I think you'd have to ask Vitalik for that. I think the blue are the big ticket items, and the green are just like normal items, but like these three ones just lead to the big deal of SSF, and then the pink is like, I think it's entirely for quantum stuff. Yeah, so it's like a far future. Yeah, so finality. After 12.6 minutes, the block is finalized, and then if you want to get this block out of the chain, that's going to cost you a lot. Like the bare minimum would be a third of the stake would have to just evaporate instantly, and then it would be something very detectable. So it's something that we want to enhance and have this finality happens every single slot, every 12 seconds, or possibly longer than 12 seconds if we increase the slot time for like the way to get there. Sync committee. I don't think sync committees are slashed, but they have heavier rewards. I'm not sure on the penalty side. That's a good question. And okay, so yeah, so there's SSF is an active area of research, and there's a few ways to get there. Most of it has to do with the number of signatures we have to process on the beacon chain. So right now there's a million active validators, which would be way too heavy to do in a single slot. So what we do, we can have fewer validators, as with max EB that I'm gonna go over later, or we can have or we can have fewer active validators, like a rotating cap, like instead of having the million validators active all at once, you can have just a fraction of that, and they periodically go in and out of sleep, which would mean that the cost of attacking finality would go down, but you would still need at least like at the majority of the stake, if not a super majority, but the actual slashing would go down if the active validators involved are fewer. And yeah, there's an ETH research post on Vitalik that has a few solution paths for that. One of them was having big validators, like 2 to the 13 validators instead of a million. So it was like going from a million down to 8,192, and then having some sort of distributed validator stack to like keep the goal of permissionless validating. All right, I'm gonna let the kitty in then. That's gonna shut him up. And yeah, signature aggregation scheme is another one that I'm basically grossly oversimplifying for the sake of time and simplicity. But right now I think it's in the next slide. Yeah, on the left you have this whole subnet of validators and bit fields, like if that gets aggregated into a single signature. So instead of validating every single signatures, you can collapse them into a single signature that's just the sum of each individual validator signature. And for that, you need a bit field. So it's a 1 if the affected validators did sign or not, or attest to the block. And yeah, so in the future, this slide is like twofold. The first part is having this quantum proof beacon chain, because what we use today is known to be vulnerable to quantum computers. So everything that relies on elliptic curve cryptography, namely the BLS signatures that we use on the beacon chain, that's going to have to go away if and when we get scalable quantum computers. Otherwise, there's a whole mess of problems that can happen. And yeah, like Vitalik has this post on Stark aggregation, because Starks, for those who don't know, just is like a succinct zero knowledge proof that relies entirely on hashes, and it's known that quantum computers can't mess with hashes. So if you just aggregate stuff with proofs that someone signed, we can have a quantum proof beacon chain, as well as more of a less organized and like, you see it's kind of chaotic on the right, where validators aggregate signatures as they receive them until we get to the end. and then we get the final aggregated signature, or rather a proof that every single validator voted with the bit field. And that's again like quantum stuff aside, just the aggregation would be cool to have, because it's very hard problems to have these bit fields like converge together when you one of the previous proofs already had a validator signature, then you want to aggregate them. I think that's it for the merge. I went over very quickly over every single items. If there are some questions, I can take some time. Also, show you my cat. He's the one who's been making all the noises. Fungible orange cat. They are very fungible. Alright. He just wants attention. Alright, next up is the surge, which is, in my opinion, more interesting because it's like it's E plus orange. Yeah, the surge is gonna have more data availability for rollups, and I'm gonna again grossly oversimplify what that means with all the polynomial magic involved. So first of all, rollups from 10,000 feet. We have to understand what we mean by rollups and why Ethereum took a rollup centric roadmap. So basically, the scaling Ethereum, the goal has always been some form of sharding, where instead of having every validator check the entire chain, then we would have shards, like mini blockchains, where every validator is like in charge of a smaller subset of the blockchain. But it turns out not only is that very hard to do, but also once we do it, rollups are going to be way more mature and ready to scale, and they're not going to use these shards as much as we hope they would. So instead, what we do is we're going to say, okay, we're not going to scale execution just yet. We're going to focus only to data, and then this data is going to be scalable and converted to layer 2 execution on rollups. And the thing that's really cool is that it turns this honest majority assumption, where like at least 51% of validators have to be honest, into a single one of n, where it only takes one participant that's honest to make sure that the rollups are participating honestly. So there's two brands of rollups, optimistic and zero knowledge. The optimistic one is, it's pretty simple to wrap your head around. Basically, every transaction is bashed onto layer 1, and they're all assumed to be valid without being checked one by one. So like they're optimistically assuming that the transactions are valid. But if they're not valid, then someone can just take the data and say, hey, the sequencer is evil. He tried to print himself a bunch of data or steal funds without having the private key involved. So there's some kind of fraud proofs on layer 1 that's gonna rectify this, but only when there's disagreement. So it's kind of like having a legal system where you have contracts that are enforced by like a court, but in reality, like the mere threat of being able to enforce a contract is enough to like have everyone participate honestly, because otherwise every single contract going to court every single time would not scale well as a society. So that's kind of the analogy that made it click for me early on. And zero knowledge rollups are a little bit more cryptographically involved, where you have these succinct proof that are just compress the entire execution at layer 2 into a short proof that can be verified by layer 1. And in both cases, you need to have both all the rollup data available on layer 1. Like, on optimistic rollups, you need to be able to have the data to be able to challenge someone that's malicious. And for both cases, also, you want to be able to force the transaction inclusion. So like if you have your funds on a rollup that has a sequencer that wants to censor you, then you can go through the layer 1 contract and force your funds to go back to layer 1 or exit to a different rollup. So yes, so that's the rollups for 10,000 feet. And I see a question about converting L1 data to L2 execution. It's kind of like a hand wavy thing to say. It's like Layer 1 offers data on these blob space that I'm going to go over in the next slide. And that's what rollups use. They just take all the execution of off chain that's verified, like verified very quickly on layer 1, but the verification relies only on, like, mostly on data rather than actual execution. So I'm not sure how to explain that, like, simpler than that, because you have to have this kind of mental model over data and execution and layer 1, layer 2, but that's the rollup rollups with 10,000 feet. So I'm just grossly oversimplifying a lot of stuff in this whole presentation. Yeah, okay, I have a slide about the training wheels on rollups. So just to be upfront, that there's still a lot of risk involved in rollups today. When you can see all the stuff on l2b.com. Like right now, we would love to have rollups fully immutable and like mature, no permission elements whatsoever, no multisig, and limited governance. And it's the trade-off space is huge for rollups, and the end game is that it's going to be as trustless as layer 1, but today it's not quite there yet, but this is what we're aiming for. And all right, so before we go to the 4844, which is the big thing from last week, I need to explain quickly what is data availability sampling, and you're gonna have to bear with me for that one, because it's a very cool concept. It's very involved with a lot of math, but it's worth it if you if you put in some effort to understand just what I'm talking about. So data availability sampling is all about answering the question, is the data available, right? Because remember, if you have an optimistic rollup, you need to have the data to prevent censorship and bad stuff from like in malicious sequencer. So if we know that the data is available, then we know that the rollup is safe and someone can challenge a sequencer. So the naive way is to download all the data, because implicitly, if you were able to download all the data, then that means it's available. But that doesn't scale very well. We want to have way more data on layer 1. So instead, what we're gonna do is take this data, make it a polynomial equation, extend it by evaluating that equation at more points, and then use what's called the polynomial commitment scheme, which is in the next slide. And from there, you can do random sampling. So don't worry, I'm just gonna go over all these steps one by one. But this is the idea is that you know how 2 points make a line and 3 points make a parabola, and then in the case of blobs, 4,096 points make that big polynomial. And I have this very simple example of like where the data is 1322 that's extended into a cubic equation, and then you can just evaluate it at 4 more points. That gives you 7, 21, 48, 92. And from there, you have these 8 points, and you know that any 4 of these points are enough to reconstruct the same polynomial, and then you can just reevaluate it and get the 1322 data back. Which is the first piece of insight, is that 50% of the extended data is enough to recover 100% of the data. So that's one of the things to keep in mind for the next slide as we delve into this other big polynomial commitment scheme. So everything in ETH research relies on polynomials. There's this magic everywhere. Okay, I've got this cat going over the camera now. Yeah, so I'm taking the same cubic equation, and basically you're gonna have to bear with me again on this black box function commit, which is kind of like a hash but with fancier properties. But it takes all these big polynomial with thousands of coefficients, and then it just compresses it into a single few bytes, like a hash that knows. And all the nodes know these commitments, and this is what they're going to use to validate proof, what we call opening proofs. And yeah, so I have like this bullet point where your node can just ask for a random data point. So you pick between 1 and 8, and in my example, just like pick 3, and then you ask the network or a validator that claims to have the data, and you say, give me the third data point, and then you receive the value 2. So the the validator that you're receiving to claims that the polynomial p evaluated at 3 is equal to 2. But not only that, he gives you a proof pi, and that's what you use to verify against the commitment to be satisfied that p of 3 is in fact equal to 2. So you don't need to evaluate the whole commitment, the whole polynomial, because that's thousands upon thousands of coefficients. It takes too much time. So instead, you just rely on these proofs. And remember from last slide, 50% of the data is enough to recover 100% of the data. So it's kind of like a little game where you can think, if I'm a malicious validator and I want to convince you that I published all of the data, then you're gonna ask me for a random point that I can't predict. And if I'm able to give you the data and the proof, then it means that at least this sample was available. And if I only publish 1% of the data, that's not enough, right? It's gonna be a 1% chance that the sample you asked me for just happens to be one of those that I did publish. So if I want to maximize my chance of fooling you into believing that data is available when it's actually not, yeah, I'm gonna have to publish like something like 49.9% of the data, so that you can't reconstruct the whole data. So you can think, in the worst case scenario, your sample had a 1 in 2 chance of being like just happening to be in the half that the data that I did publish. So that's not enough to be satisfied. So you just ask for another random data point that I can't predict, and then if it happens to be in the half that I did publish, then both samples are going to compound to 25%, and then you ask for another sample that's 12.5%. And after just 30 samples, you see that it's a 1 in a billion chance of being fooled. So it's at some point it's just not it's not practical to say, okay, I'm satisfied. I didn't download the whole data. I only did 30 samples, but it's enough to convince me that the data is available. So this is basically the crux of data sampling that we're going to use to scale this data availability. And things that are important to know is that this proof pi is very short compared to the thousands of coefficients. Verifying it is also very short in terms of computing power required. And those 30 symbols, they're independent of how much data is actually there. So even if it's just 1 megabyte or 1,000 terabytes, those 30 samples give you that same 1 in a billion chance. So it's kind of a constant. It's like a magical thing where it's just 30 samples is enough no matter how much data was actually there. And yeah, the node was able to answer this question, is the data available, just by doing a few sample checks and being satisfied without having to get the whole burden of downloading all of it, which is the very simple way to do it that we do presently in the blockchain. And with that, we can go back to EIP 4844, which was just activated on mainnet recently, which is the big thing. It sets the stage for this big sampling that I just talked about, but right now there's no big sampling going on. We're still in that non-fancy Winnie the Pooh meme and above. We're relying on every node downloading every single blob. But the way it's constructed is that we're already doing the polynomial magic with the commitment scheme, which is we're relying on KCG for those who want to dive deeper into it. It's a relatively simple cryptographic construction if you're willing to ignore pairings and just take them at face value. But yeah, since we're downloading everything, we have to be conservative in terms of bandwidth and storage. So we started with 3 blobs per block with a maximum of 6. And this is priced like EIP for 1559, where if you have more than 3 in a block, then the next block is going to be more expensive until it averages to 3. And right now we're doing basically an average of 1 blob per block, 1.16 on the screenshot from last night, but it varies a lot. And because of that, it's it's very cheap, where blobs are still cost a single way, so that's 10 to the negative 18. I think it's an octillionth of an ETH, or rather a billionth of a GUI. So it's incredibly cheap to post data on chain right now. I put this screenshot from Etherscan from, I think it was Arbitrum, that posted 6 blobs in a single transaction, and it cost them 786,000 waves, which is like 0.000131 GUI per blob, which is basically nothing. Oh yeah, we're going to the quantum after that. Is the blob fee also burned? Yes, it's like the base fee. The blob fee is used to manage congestion, so it's good. It's also burned, and you can go on ultrasound.money and they have a little widget, and I think right now we're around 5 GUI total has been burned by rollups on data, so we're still under congested, which is cool. We have nearly free transactions on layer 2s. Yeah, afterwards we have the same quantum stuff on the far future, because right now, okay, we have the KCG commitment scheme is like almost perfect, except for the fact that it's not quantum proof and it required a trusted setup. So I don't know who participated here in the chat, but we had over 140,000 contributors, which is once again a 1 of n assumption. So we needed to get a random secret in a way that the secret has to be thrown away in the future after you generated it. Otherwise, you can make fake proofs. And as long as a single participant of those 140,000 contributors was honest, then that's enough for the whole thing to be honest. Like, so it's called a trusted setup, but as far as we're concerned, like there's no trust involved, because it's not 140,000 contributors is a lot. Yeah, so in the future, we want to hot swap KCG for something based either on Starks or lattices, which is another crazy cryptography thing that quantum computers can't break. It's probably going to be Starks again, because it's always Starks. And the other item in the far future, or depending on how deeply involved we want to get, is cross rollup interoperability. So like we know that liquidity fragmentation, and it's a whole thing right now with rollups. We want to have a more seamless experience where it's all abstracted away. So there's a lot of stuff you can look up, like on based rollups and pre-confirmations, shared sequencing. I think some of it will come back later in other urges. Just gonna check questions while I drink water. Where is all this stuff going on the CL or the EL? Yeah, the consensus layer receives the blobs and validates the availability. So you have this function on the consensus layer that's just a Boolean, is data available? And the validators on the consensus layer, they receive the blobs, and then by the fact that they receive the blob, they know it's available. So this function is satisfied, and then they can attest to a block. On the execution layer, all you see is the KCG commitment, so this big commit function for polynomials. And like, of course, it has to match with the actual blob data, so that's another check that validators do, but the data lives on the consensus layer until it's pruned 18 days later or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, so now we're at the scourge, which is one that I'm gonna go over quickly over each item, but yeah, all of it has to do with MEV pretty much, and staking economics. And so I'm just have a few slides here, like talking about PBS, proposer builder separation. And basically it's all the research on MEV concluded that MEV markets are inevitable, so we have to at least tame it so solo stakers can still have access to this yield. and not have to pool or be out earned by specialized validators. So we take all the centralized elements and we put them into this corner that are builders, and these builders are free to specialize and be super beefy and deal with MEV extractions and have the best optimization algorithms, best bandwidth, best everything. And we have MEF Boost right now, which is out of protocol PBS, which kind of like is a band-aid solution until we can actually enshrine it. And yeah, I have it here, the sentence about minimizing the choices validators have to make. So if it weren't for PBS and MEF Boost, then you would have validators have so much choices to make about how to extract the best amount of value, which is bad because it hurts the solo stakers that can't specialize. So instead, you minimize the choices made by stakers by simply having to pick the highest bid from builders. So it's kind of how we tame the centralization and concerns around MEV. And yeah, so that's MEV Boost. And in the future, we want to enshrine that into the protocol directly, so we won't have to rely on trusted relays. And we have like better goodies like burning the MEV to smooth the staking yield, which is another whole topic in itself. Because once we have enshrined PBS, then the protocol becomes aware of how much MEV is actually happening on top and like in the application layer which is kind of crazy when you think about it. You would be able to have some sort of MEV oracle inside the EVM to do all sorts of crazy things. And the other item is inclusion lists, which are making big noise right now to be included in a next fork, hopefully, which would make validators like solo stakers in charge of forcing builders to include certain transactions, so that even though builders are centralized, they're still restrained in what they can do, as in they're restrained in the transactions they have to include, so they wouldn't be able to do stuff like we've seen with the MEV OFAC sanction transactions in the past. That's still a big concern today. And yeah, I have something very quickly about the endgame block production, which you can see on Vitalik's block. It's basically like I cropped the diagram, but the three arrows come from various paths that a blockchain can take, and they all end up there if you want to scale to like billions of users, which is that block production has to be centralized, but validation of blocks is going to be decentralized, and there's going to be anti-censorship protection like inclusion lists and possibly more little gadgets we can have. And what kind of transactions will be in the inclusion list? Just any transaction, like a validator just sees transactions in the mempool and puts them in the inclusion list, and then the builder is forced to include them. Right, so execution tickets. See, it just says explore, so it's not a guarantee that we're actually gonna get that on chain, but it's a relatively recent ideas from Justin Drake, and you can see this ETH research post. But it's a very elegant way to get. Okay, got the zoomies. It's an elegant way to deal with MEV and all the distorted yield to solo stakers by basically selling the right to propose a block ahead of time, like in a lottery. So that's why the term tickets come from. And it's once again more separation. So between the idea of attesting to which block is in the chain versus proposing an actual block. So it was initially called attester proposer separation before it got renamed to execution tickets. I'm not gonna go spend too much time over it, but it's a very elegant little design. So I encourage anyone to go to the ETH research post, which is linked in the notes in the wiki. But yeah, I like that it still keeps the degen MEV lottery, permissionless for anyone who wants to play it, because that's something that solo stakers mentioned that they love today, but it's something that we would prefer not to be there because MEV is very spiky and like that's an incentive to pool. Yeah. Afterwards, yeah, I have these two little items for MEV minimization on the app layer, which is not too much of a concern of core protocol research as much, but it's like just to put there as a nudge to people who develops smart contracts and dApps, just like, hey, like keep MEV in mind if you want to either capture it or prevent it. So stuff like cow swap is pretty cool in like preventing sandwiching, and that's something that just happens at the app layer. That's not a concern of the protocol. And then the pre-confirmations is what I mentioned briefly earlier, which is basically find a way to get builders to promise inclusion of your transaction in the next block. So it's like your transaction is confirmed before the block actually includes it. And there's various ways to do this. And yeah, it pairs well with execution tickets and various restaking schemes. Yeah, there's a few ETH research. I think they were linked in my annotated roadmap. Yeah, the next big items of the scourge is staking economics, which the big one that's possibly in the next fork, if we're lucky, is raising the max effective balance. So right now, the minimum and the maximum stake is both 32 ETH. So if your validators accumulated like an extra ETH and your balance is 33, then you're still only earning yield on that 32 ETH, which is what we call your effective balance. Like even if your balance is 33, your effective balance as far as the beacon chain is concerned is still 32. And the goal of max EB is to raise that all the way to 2048. So the main benefit is for soul stakers is you get automatic compounding, right? So like it's the example earlier, if you go from 32 to 33, then automatically your extra ETH starts counting in your balance and earning rewards. But the main goal is from a protocol perspective is that you're going to have fewer validators for the same amount of stake. So all the stuff about signature aggregation and bandwidth overhead from like a large staking pool taking like thousands and thousands of validators are just going to be able to consolidate that and send a single signature instead of thousands of signatures. So that's going to drastically reduce the overhead and be one of the pathways toward single slot finality, but also remove the sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, it's a path to single slot finality and reducing bandwidth requirements for nodes and concept like block space future where you auction off future blocks. It is somewhat related, but execution tickets is more about the beacon proposal blocks. It's there's a little distinction, but I'm not gonna go in it too deeply. Yeah, the next item in the staking economics tracks is exploring total stake capping. So there was a somewhat controversial proposal from Caspar on ETH research about changing the issuance curve so that after a certain point it can possibly go negative. So which is kind of weird if you think about it. If the staking yield is like -1%, but it gets compensated by MEV and like transaction fees, so that you're 1%, even though you're actually paying the beacon chain for the right to be a validator, you're still net profitable from MEV and execution layer activity. And yeah, it still relates to having too many validators, meaning too much overhead, but there's also economic downsides to having too much of a big percentage of the supply staked. So stake targeting is another little idea of like maybe we want like something like 25% of the supply to be staked and then like enshrine that in the protocol directly and then like have some sort of issuance curve to reward more when there's less than 25% and reward less when there's over 25%. But that's a active area of research. And yeah, the next little item is liquid staking centralization. There's a bunch of concerns over liquid staking pools and LSTs. So there's some ideas around enshrining a liquid staking token inside the protocol directly, which would like be effectively a zero fee LST that would be less centralizing than an actual staking pool. And the other ideas that I've seen float around is capping the slashing penalties. So if you cap it to something like 2 ETH, then you can have fully trustless and risk-free LSTs like with a bond of 2 ETH, like something like Rocket Pool. Like right now, there's still the possibility that a Rocket Pool validator just messes with finality and then gets their entire stake slashed, including the stake that belongs to the pool. But if we cap the slashing penalties to 2 ETH, then only their bond would get slashed, and then the rest goes back to the pool. So that would be it's like a relatively simple tweak to the beacon chain mechanism to make these decentralized LSTs more viable than the centralized ones. Yeah, so that's the Scourge. The Verge is another one that I'm gonna spend a bit more time on because it's another one of the next big thing, which as like we got the merge, we got 4844 and blob space, and then vertical trees are the next big thing in my opinion, because they were very cool, and it's gonna be a very interesting upgrade. So first, I don't know who is like too familiar with the concept of state versus history. I think it's pretty straightforward, but just to go over it very quickly, you got this little blockchain here that I made in PowerPoint with the block n, that's like the current block, and then references the block n-1, which references the block n-2. So all these past blocks are the history that gives you the transfer and the transactions of that happened on Ethereum, and computing these transactions give you the current state, so all the balances and all the contract variables and stuff like that. So right now, when we sync the chain, you basically have to sync the history, compute the state, and then you can start checking balances and validating new transactions that are coming in. And the question is there a better way to do this? And the answer is yes, again with polynomial magic, as we'll see. Yeah, so today the state is like computed from the history, as I said in the previous slide, but it's also structured in a tree form for reasons that we'll see. Like this is the very simple state tree that I made with like 4 participants that all have their own balances, and like 2 becomes a node that you just hash the value of the two different children, and then you concatenate that together, and then you hash the concatenation, and then you do that all the way up to the state root. And this is what you have in block headers. So without the transaction, you have access to the state root, and that's what you can use to make what's called a state access proof. So yeah, you can prove that Bob owns 5 ETH in this very simple example by you just receive the sibling nodes. So you just like send the node. Okay, you got cat knocked something over, really annoying. So okay, the Merkle proof it's a very simple thing. You just show send the sibling. So you send the sibling of Alice, and then you send the node for Charlie and Dave, which is just concatenated. So the yellow nodes are the ones that are part of the proof, and the green nodes are the ones that you can compute on your end to verify the proof. So if you just like do the hashes all the way to the state root, and you validate that it checks out with the state root in the block header, you get you're satisfied that Bob has 5 ETH, and then which is something that you can send to something like a light client that doesn't have access to, that only checks the sync committees and the block headers on the execution layer, that doesn't have to compute all the transactions. But the big takeaway is that these proofs are start becoming more and more large and unmanageable as we get a bigger and bigger state, which is like a constant thing on Ethereum. Every single transaction increases the state, basically. So instead, like this is a very again with the same tree, but now it's a vertical tree. So every node is basically a number. It's just treated as a number, and then you do polynomial magic again. So instead of having being a state root now, it's like a concatenation of hashes and whatnot. It's just a polynomial commitment, as we've seen with the data sampling. So I have this. The same example. To prove that Bob owns 5 ETH, you just have to prove that the state root is a commitment that matches that the first child is the commitment C1 with the proof of pi 1, and then you know the commitment C1, you can go with the proof pi 2. So you don't need the actual siblings, which is the biggest gain. Yeah, so this is the next slide. Like you don't need all these nodes. You only need the path and the intermediary nodes, and the polynomial proof that like the interpolation of the polynomial actually gives you the proper value. And the big bonus is that the proofs can actually be merged with batch openings, which is another deep cryptography thing with polynomial commitments that I'm not gonna go over. Yeah, so after that, once we do the transactions to vertical trees, it becomes much like the whole blockchain is, you can have stateless validators. I don't know where to start. I'm just gonna start. That the vertical proofs are much shorter, like I said earlier, but also since now you don't need the siblings, you can have a much wider tree. With like 256 children instead of the 16 that we have today with the Merkle Patricia tree state roots. And not only that, but the vertical trees are also ZK friendly, so it's compared to the hashes that are like awkward to batch. You can have these proofs and just aggregate them together, and it makes light clients way more maintainable, as they only need to query the light client protocol that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, and then they know that the block is inside the canonical chain, and then with these vertical proofs they can know balances, they can query balances, and another anyone that has the state can compute these vertical proofs and like satisfy the light client and say, okay, here's your balance, and you can't actually be tricked this way. And the big thing is statelessness, which is you spin up your node or your validator and you don't actually need the history. You receive a block N, you have no knowledge of the state whatsoever. All you see is the state root inside the block header, and you have this new thing called a block witness, which is basically all the vertical proofs that are needed to compute the transactions. So like if you see that Bob sends 5 ETH to someone else, then you need a proof that he actually owns these 5 ETH, and that's going to be part of the witness. So you don't actually need to compute all the previous blocks to be satisfied that Bob has 5 ETH. You're just going to check this witness, and that's going to be approved by vertical trees. So it's like instant sync, but also it alleviates a lot of the burden around storing the entire state, which is a lot of read and writes operations. And I'm just reading the chat quickly, drinking. So yeah, statelessness is a big thing, but that's only possible with the vertical trees, because Merkle proofs are way too huge, and the block witness would be like probably megabytes or gigabytes long if we have a lot of transactions that access a lot of the state. Are these stateless validators running somewhere? Well, not today because we don't have vertical trees, but it would be like an option to either sync the whole state if you need it, or just start syncing and checking block witnesses only. Yes. And yeah, the last bullet points, like clients become even lighter because they only have the sync committee and the Virgo proofs to check balances and stuff. And another underrated aspect of statelessness is devs that have like this applications that rely on like a back end of some sort that need to index values of balances specifically to the users of their applications. Like today, they have to rely mostly on centralized indexers because if they want to keep track of user balances and other variables that's only relevant to their users, they still have to sync the entire state. And it's awkward when you want to have previous state because you have to index everything and then keep track of balances in the past, like past state, instead of just the current state. So like you can picture something like graphing the price of a token or something over time. So right now there's a lot of reliance on the graph or Infura for big archive nodes because it's hard to run one. But with Verkle trees, the way it's going to be structured is you can only execute blocks that are relevant to your application. So if like there's 1,000 blocks in the past and only 30 of them actually touch your smart contract, then you can only execute these 30 blocks and update your state in your backend to do whatever you want with it, like displaying information to your users in your front end. So that's gonna like I said, it's an underrated aspect that I don't see people mention enough. So it's something that I'm shouting out right now. Afterwards, yeah, snarkify all the things. That's the like Verkle trees are cool. It's a very simple verification of state access, but it's still not good enough. We want to have zero knowledge proofs of everything. So like the light client protocol is already light, but it's going to be even lighter once like all the transitions of the sync committee from every 27-hour up to the present day is all a single proof that you can just validate very quickly. It's just a small snark. And from there, the next logical step is to snarkify the beacon chain transitions as well. So that would effectively render the light client protocol obsolete if you can just have a single snark that validates the entire beacon chain signatures and balances and slashings and everything. And that's the consensus layer. On the execution layer, you want to have you want to snarkify the Verkle state access proofs. That would make it even faster to verify the block witnesses. If you can just merge every single proof into a single snark. And yeah, the absolute end game is that all the EVM execution is a snark. So you receive a block and you check a snark and then that little proof just checks absolutely everything, and you didn't have to do actual EVM computation on yourself. You just receive the block, you do the data sampling for the rollups that I mentioned above, and you verify these proofs, and you're satisfied that the data is available and the execution actually checks out with the resulting state root of the next block. So this is like very futuristic stuff, but it's very cool that ZK rollups are actually working on ZK EVMs that we can eventually bring back to the core protocol and then have like a full circle. And then this is how we get scalable layer 1 execution with all these ZK proofs. And yeah, the ZK EVM opcode and precompile, I'm just going to mention it briefly because it's even super cool that the EVM could have a way to verify EVM proofs. So you can have the very simple ZK rollup supported by the EVM natively. And so you can have like EVM proofs inside EVM proofs verified by this opcode or precompile directly in the EVM. So it's like very futuristic stuff. With the snarkification of the state make AO2s irrelevant. they're still going to be relevant on the long term, but not as much for scalability. But I would also say scalability compounds. So if you scale layer one, that effortlessly scales layer twos as well. So there's this idea of fractal scaling that you can look up, that there is always going to be some layer twos no matter what, or at least that's what I expect. Exactly, Josh. If you scale L1, it scales L2s. Which I didn't mention it, but vertical trees with statelessness, we're gonna be able to easily triple the gas limit. So cheaper layer one fees after statelessness, which is gonna be super cool too. Yeah, after that, the last two are very. I don't have much to say, so I'm just gonna go over quickly. The purge is all about having a simpler protocol. So the big ticket in that one is history expiry. So EIP 4444, also nicknamed the 4 4s, which in a nutshell is that nodes are not going to be expected to store history older than 1 year, and this feels scary because we're used to having nodes verify the entire blockchains, but it turns out it's not that necessary with what Ethereum is trying to achieve at being a real-time settlement layer. So I don't know who said it. I think it was Tim Bako in a tweet from I don't know how much time ago, but it's basically if you ask 1,000 node what the latest block is, then you're gonna have some disagreement. Like someone didn't receive the block in time and think that the previous block is the head of the chain and stuff like that. But if you ask them what's the 10,000th block ago, they're all gonna agree on that history, and so it's like no disagreeing on history, especially on finalized blocks, is so it's like basically impossible. So it's not that big of a deal to prune history compared to the advantages that we get from simplifying client code bases. So stuff like all the previous rules supported by earlier forks that are no longer relevant today, then you can just remove that from your code base and only focus on how the protocol actually works today. And of course, it removes a lot of the storage requirements from nodes. And technically, the 4 4s can be implemented at any point. It's not a hard fork. It's just like some kind of peer-to-peer convention between nodes. So it's before activated it, we want to have history reliably accessible by other means. So the most decentralized one is like the Portal Network, which is a protocol specifically for like sharing history and like proof of state access for like clients. But there's gonna be way more options for having old history like BitTorrent or Block Explorers. Yes, Nick. So it's basically a soft fork where we want. I'm not too aware of what goes on at the peer-to-peer layer, but EIP 4444 is just nodes just stop being required to serve old history for those who ask it. Yes. And the next purge is state expiry, which personally I don't believe it's ever going to happen because it breaks too much stuff and it's a way lower priority compared to the synchronicity between PBS and statelessness makes it a way lower priority. But yeah, it was a notable change on the Vitalik's update of the roadmap this year that he just downgraded it from a big ticket blue item to just a green one. But yeah, personally, I don't believe it's gonna happen because you would have to extend the length of addresses and then do all sorts of crazy stuff with periods of states and then redeploy the same tokens across state and verify a lot of too much breaking changes. But still mentioned there because it's on the roadmap. And then yeah, just want to abolish the state. Yeah, I think you can have a stateless client that's like partially stateless. So if there's a part of the state that hasn't been touched in forever, then you can just prune it locally, and like you can laser focus your node to have only the state that's relevant to your accounts or rollups that you care about and stuff like that. So that's why I think state expiry is not that big of a deal. It's not a priority right now. And then the last little items on the purge is various harmonizations. So like the execution layer uses something called RLP for the serialization of transactions and blocks, whereas on the consensus layer is SSZ. And in the future, we would like to simplify that and move everything to SSZ altogether, and then phase out all transaction types like the legacy type before 1559, and possibly go toward a scheme where like all the access lists are forced in transactions and stuff like that. But it's the way to do that is the active area of research, I guess. And yeah, that's all I had to say about the purge. And the splurge is all the rest that we want to have on the core protocol, but doesn't fit anywhere else. It's just we get to splurge and have these miscellaneous goodies. So the big one is EOF, which is EVM object formats. It's a lot of EIPs that have been benched somewhat recently, but it's a work in progress to restructure some aspects of the EVM, and I'm not actually the person to talk to about EOF, so I just put the link there about the overview of EOF. But my understanding is that it makes upgrading the EVM in the future, like in a forward compatible way, much easier. So it would be cool to have EOF in the core protocol, and then layer 2s can innovate and like leverage that to have their own little EVMs, upgrade stuff and try out stuff that without having to change layer 1 every single time. Yeah, that's the EOF. And the other big ticket item of the splurge is account abstraction, which is at this point a decade-old unsolved problem of Ethereum. Is that your wallet that has a private key and a balance and stuff is bad. Like, it's very terrible. Like, there's no way to have someone else pay for your gas fees. There's no way to batch your transactions as easily. Like, just think of having to first approve a token and then swap it in the next transaction. And there's a lot of concerns around key security, which when you zoom out of the crypto world, it's kind of embarrassing that you can't do simple things like revoking a key or rotating it without like having to awkwardly move all your funds one by one, which is expensive and takes a lot of time. And yeah, other stuff from account abstraction is spending conditions and social recovery. So you could have, instead of having like a hot wallet with a key that holds fewer funds compared to your cold wallet, you could have custom spending conditions or things like I can spend X amount of funds per day, but if I want to move all too much fund at once, then I need an extra key from that's like in cold storage. So you can have a single wallet that does all these things and put trusted guardians as like recovery people. And there's a lot of like the design space for smart wallets like basically infinite, but right now all we got is these EOAs, which are just terrible. And yeah, the big EIPs and ERCs is 3074 for delegating control of an EOA to a smart contract, which is not on Vitalik's roadmap, I believe, for political reasons, but I am personally bullish on 3074 for the next fork. And ERC 4337 is a smart wallet standard that doesn't affect the core protocol, at least not today, but it's a very good protocol for standardizing, for having the same standards across all the EVM chains, instead of every single rollup having their own little native standard for account abstraction. And eventually, it's possible to convert an EOA to a smart wallet compatible with 4337 inside the protocol, which is what is meant by in-protocol enshrining. And that would basically give us the account abstraction utopia that we so desire. And yeah, end game EIP 1559. That's always a big question that people have on the when they see the roadmap. It's like, what does that mean? I thought 1559 was already so great. So what would make it end game? And the three main ones that I see is make it more like an automatic market maker curve. Um, like instead of tracking the previous usage in the previous block, you can just track the excess gas. So if you go above the target of 15 million, like if you just go by 16 million, then that's gonna add a million to the excess gas that's like tracked over time, and that makes it more stable because actually today it doesn't actually target 15 million. It's like something like 63 64th under the target, because if you go over by 12.5% and then you go under by 12.5%, then it doesn't actually get you back to zero. It gets you just slightly under zero. So it's like a weird quirk of 1559 that can be enhanced with this tracking the excess gas. And another benefit is that it makes the censorship cost higher, because right now if your block builder decides to not include a transaction for whatever reason, then they just forego the priority fee. But with this design, they would have to forego the entire fee, which not gonna get into it, but it's like it would still burn as much ETH as 1559 today, but the opportunity cost of censoring would be the entire fee instead of just the priority fee, from the way that they like the mental models, like the builder can buy excess gas from the protocol and then make up for it by transactions. So that's something that's gonna have to happen at some point. Otherwise, the two other things is multi-dimensional EIP 1559, like we have for blobs today. That the pricing for Ethereum resources is two-dimensional as of last week, which is super cool. But you can go one step further and do that for more resources, like having the call data as priced separately, so that it doesn't affect the cost of writing or reading to the state, and then like you can manage block sizes independently of computation and stuff like that. So that would make it way more efficient, and it would it would remove this weird quirk of like bundling everything inside this single unit of gas, where we have to account for the worst case scenario of everything. So like today we have to account for what's the worst case scenario of someone writing a bunch of stuff to the state and then just destroying the storage for every single node. Like we have to make it expensive to write to the state, but also we have to make it expensive to write a lot of call data and then make big blocks that nodes can't follow. And instead, we can have the worst case scenario individually tailored to each resource. And that would be the benefit of multi-dimensional EIP 1559. And the last little thing is like a minor thing is making the base fee calculation time aware. Because right now, if a validator misses a slot for whatever reason, then the next block is gonna have more transaction to fill in, and from the perspective of the protocol, that just means suddenly the demand doubled because the protocol is not aware of the missed slot. It just treats that as a spike in demand, but it's when in reality it's not actually a spike in demand. It's just like kind of a supply shortage. And yeah, there's EIP 4396 for making time a part of the base fee calculation. And I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so the splurge has the deep cryptography things, like fully homomorphic encryptions and one-shot signatures and all the stuff that's like super futuristic. That's an active area of research, not just from Ethereum research, but also like actual cryptography research that's at the very frontier of cryptography, and then figure out what we can do from that. So I think one-shot signature is the best example of that. You see Justin Drake read this paper that uses quantum computers and a bunch of other futuristic cryptography, and then You can have signatures that actually destroy themselves after you sign the message, and there's a way to potentially integrate that in the blockchain, like in the far future once we have quantum computers, and then that would remove the need to have slashing altogether. But I need to emphasize that it's really futuristic, but it's something that's super cool. And the next big thing is like encrypting the mempool altogether, which would remove all the toxic MEV because you don't know what the transaction you're including actually represents. So you can't sandwich someone with high slippage or extract stuff from individual users. But it still leaves like non-toxic MEV like arbitrage between two exchanges and liquidation. That still leaves it on the table. So there will still be MEV existing for wanting to be at the top of the block. And yeah, I'll try to remember to go back and share the paper about one-shot signatures. Yeah, the last items is VDFs, verifiable delay function, which in a nutshell is just non-parallelizable proof of work, where it's a very slow to compute in one direction. So it's like you can verify that you had to wait or like do some function that took you a lot of time, and then you can verify it easily after the fact. So it's like proof of work, but not non-parallelizable, and basically it would enhance the randomness using the beacon chain, because today it's not fully random, because like the validator in charge of proposing a block could decide to miss their slot on purpose to mess with the randomness, but that's just like one bit of control over a lot of got marked up on the camera. So yeah, VDFs. There was a paper recently that proved that the construction that we were hoping for with VDFs is actually weak. So I don't know. It's like in the far future thing. It's another one of those things where it's not, we don't strictly need it, but it would be good to have. So it's like in the end of the splurge roadmap. And yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you for watching. And I guess we have more time, like 10 minutes for question.
Thanks so
Awesome,
much,
Dom. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was
Yeah, my
great
pleasure.
presentation on the roadmap. Looks like we got a bunch of questions getting maybe typed in the chat right now. Yeah, let's see what we have to say here. I'm curious. Do you have like an opinion on what is the sort of highest priority topic on the roadmap, as they're all kind of being developed and researched in parallel?
Yeah.
What do you think is like sort of the cream we should be looking at?
Well, I think the next priority would be vertical trees, which are hopeful inclusion in the next fork. But it's the transition between Merkle state tree that we have today into the vertical tree is like still a few options that we have to weigh together. But I believe it's the big ticket item for the next fork. But yes, everything in parallel is cool. And blob space last week just alleviated a lot of the scaling concerns around layer twos. So that's gives us some more time to do the other big things.
Yeah, it seems like Verkle is definitely like mostly researched and like has a good amount of its implementation
Yes.
already underway. What do you think is like one of the topics that still has a lot of research, or maybe a lot of figuring out still to do, that somebody in this study group might want to take on as like a pet project or something like that?
I think Enshrine PBS has a lot of like trade-offs, and we've been bike shading over various designs, and there's always like a trade-off to be made between like latency and I don't know, the the various design proposed always have something that doesn't quite work, and it's always weird to keep things in mind, especially with inclusion list. Like inclusion list with stateless validators doesn't mesh very well, so that's another active area of research. So I my fear is that we're gonna have to settle for like the least bad design around like enshrined PBS, which is kind of a shame because PBS itself is super cool as a concept.
Cool. Uh, OXAI asks what single thing has the most potential to simplify all of this complexity?
Um, as in like the for PBS or just roadmap in general.
I think they're referring to the roadmap generally.
Uh,
It
oh,
seems
what
like
do
a
we
lot
do
of the
with it?
stuff in the roadmap just adds more and more complexity to the
Yeah.
protocol. Outside of like the purge stuff, like what else what is there that's maybe like reducing complexity or allowing some of this complexity to work together with itself?
I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Something to simplify, yeah. Like if there's something that comes up and solves the same goals in a simpler way, then like that would be weighed very heavily compared to the other things we have planned. But like the roadmap is pretty much no, I wouldn't say set in stone, but it's like it's a result of a lot of years of research, and then we know basically how to do stuff. And outside of the slight neat picks that I mentioned around EPBS, and I think that's pretty much the way to go. And I would be surprised if something comes up and says, "Hey, we can solve all these things super in much simpler way." But like, I
Yeah,
would welcome it for
that
sure.
makes sense. I'm curious if you have any opinions on sort of the breadth of this roadmap and the potentials for ossification and the ability of core devs to actually get all of this done before the protocol potentially ossifies.
Um, yeah, ossification. We're not ready for ossification yet, in my opinion, but it
Do
is
you think that
becoming harder and
ossification is
harder.
something that we have control over, or is something that is going to happen out of the hands of people who are working on the protocol?
It really depends on how much we're ready to like take the required risks and implementation time for the remaining items. I think the roadmap itself is mostly ossified at this point. So like there's a general agreement that we're gonna do vertical trees, even though it's like super complex and kind of risky in terms of transitioning. But it's something we know we're gonna have to do. But like I think at some point, like 10, 15 years from now, when all these things are done, I think it's going to be much harder to go ahead and propose some change that's like on the same level of risk as the stuff we're about to undertake. But I think like yeah, like Nixo says in the chat, like ossification is not unnecessarily possible. Like there's always the possibility that something happens and then we have to change something, but like there has to be a good reason. Like I would rather to see that door stay open a little bit, even though it's like an uphill battle that's becoming harder and harder each fork.
Sure. Yeah. Just to clarify, ossification is the process of like the hardening of the protocol or making it much more challenging to uh, make any kind of upgrades for whatever reason it might be. Lots of people having a stake in what happens,
Mm.
and conversations and consensus being harder to reach, and a number of different ways that it might be that
Yeah.
changes to the protocol are challenging to push through. Cool. Any other questions from the chat here? Yeah, ossification isn't necessarily a bad thing per se. Like, you know, yeah. Awesome. Any last thoughts from you, Mario?
I had one more question. What was the name of the cat? And like, can we make it mascot of the EPF of the study group? Like, we were still looking kind of for a mascot, so it really sit with us.
Yeah, the orange cat is Mimir. I just
Oh
typed
yeah.
his name in the chat. Mimir. He's
Thank
extremely
you,
orange.
thank you so much. Yeah, we loved
Yes.
it, and we loved your talk. Yeah, thank you so much, Dom.
Alright.
It was really great,
My
yeah,
pleasure.
really appreciated going through all the parts of the roadmap, all the weeds, especially during all those distractions from the chat constantly asking and the cat constantly begging for attention. So we really appreciate it. Yeah, it was great. And thank you so much for being with us in the Discord. I guess we can continue with some questions there as well. Hope to have you around.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's really good giving this talk. I love the roadmap in general.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
learned a
Well,
lot.
we will
Good.
see you all next on Thursday for a workshop with Mario on running a node.
All right.
Yeah, so to continue this week on Thursday the same time, I'll see you with like more practical hands-on workshop, and also like just to give you a heads up, next week we will also continue on Monday, and we will start the second phase of the study group, and I'll share the exact schedule of the next 5 weeks in the wiki later this week. But to give you a heads up, next week there will be also Monday and Thursday talk at the regular time. So uh, I'll see you. I'll see you Thursday and next week. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Dom, again.